Deep within the segmentum obscurus, a new storm had awakened, vast and unnatural even by the standards of the warp. Astropaths died screaming across half a dozen sectors, their eyes melting into their skulls as they whispered the same fragmented word: doom. Doom. The Emperor's tarot burned black on every ship that dared divine its meaning, and from the crimson heart of the tempest, the Imperium began to fold inward upon itself like a collapsing lung. The storm grew teeth. Void ships belonging to the Mechanicus Explorator Fleet Eternitas Lex drifted too close to its edge. On their auger screens, reality flickered and distorted, as though the laws of existence were being rewritten mid-measure. One by one, their Geller fields howled and fractured. Within seconds, the fleet's Vox traffic became a symphony of madness, binary shrieks and human prayers drowning in the same static. Tech priest Magos Elethan stood before the viewing chamber, his many lenses focusing on the expanding sphere of unnatural light. The warp was not supposed to behave this way. It pulsed rhythmically, almost mechanically, as if a sentient equation had found its voice. Lightning burst across its surface, and through that electric storm he saw something descending, not a meteor, not a demon, but a throne wrought of burning metal. The throne was green and silver, inscribed with symbols that no human tongue could pronounce. Upon it sat a figure draped in tattered regality. A mask of iron concealed his face, its gaze cold and deliberate, even amid the storm's insanity. Around his armored form swirled broken fragments of space and time, memories of other universes, echoes of lost worlds. Dr. Victor von Doom had entered the 41st millennium. The warp bent in reverence and fury around him. To the demons lurking in that madness, this being was an anomaly, mortal yet uncorrupted, arrogant yet untouched by fear. They whispered to him, called him by 1,000 names: usurper, false god, mortal king. Doom heard their voices and dismissed them with contempt. He raised his gauntleted hand, and from his fingertips radiated an energy that the warp itself struggled to consume. He fell. The throne shattered as he plummeted through reality's skin, crashing down upon a wasteland beneath a bleeding sky. The world that caught him was no sanctuary. It was a demon world, a realm sculpted from the dreams of the insane. Mountains of bone rose against the burning horizon. Rivers of molten glass carried echoes of screams. Above, vast shapes coiled in clouds of smoke, feeding upon the despair of the damned. Doom lay still for a moment, his armor hissing with cooling vapor. Systems rebooted in rapid succession, attempting to interpret the impossible data around him. His senses failed to recognize the atmosphere. His technology registered the presence of physical laws that contradicted each other every few seconds. And yet, he stood. He always stood. He examined the landscape with the same precision he once reserved for his laboratories. The air vibrated with invisible frequencies, resonant with a presence that was not divine but parasitic. He knew this sensation, not from experience but from instinct. It was the scent of gods, the stench of those who ruled through illusion. Another pantheon, he muttered, his voice echoing through the iron mask. Another collection of liars and tyrants. Doom extended his gauntlet toward the horizon. A green surge of energy rippled outward, scanning and dissecting everything it touched. The soil screamed, the sky convulsed, and still he recorded. Even here, surrounded by madness, his intellect refused surrender. He began to walk. Hours passed, or minutes. Time was a broken concept here. In the distance, a tower rose from the landscape, impossible in geometry and blasphemous in design. It pulsed like a living organ, exhaling shadows with every breath. As Doom approached, figures emerged from the dark, human shapes twisted by mutation and madness, their armor made of bone and rusted faith. They bowed in trembling worship, sensing in him a power both alien and divine. Who rules this place? Doom demanded, his voice cutting through their incoherent prayers. One of the creatures, its face a ruin of fused metal and flesh, whispered, "And none rule, all serve." The four watch and the four hunger. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and then the sky itself split apart. Four colossal silhouettes emerged from the clouds, not bodies but presences, their forms barely tethered to reality. 1,000 mouths spoke as one, each syllable dripping with temptation. "We know you, Victor von Doom," the voices intoned. "We have seen your world and your failures. And your failures. Your arrogance cost you godhood once. Will you kneel now and reclaim it?" Doom's laughter rolled across the barren plain like thunder. "I kneel," he said. "I do not kneel to gods. I create them." The warp trembled. The creatures who had bowed before him screamed and dissolved into dust as the powers behind those voices recoiled. Not in fear, but in fascination. Here was a mortal who refused corruption, who looked upon eternity not as destiny but as a system to be conquered. Doom raised his hand once more. His armor's arcane circuits flared with blinding light, symbols of both science and sorcery dancing across his gauntlet. "You speak of power as though it were your domain," he said. "But I have seen universes collapse beneath equations of my own design. You will bargain, not command." The air itself split into fragments of time, forming a circle of fire around him. The four presences laughed, not in mockery but in hunger. The game had begun. Somewhere deep within the warp, a new equation had entered existence. A paradox wearing armor. A mortal who spoke to gods as an equal. And far beyond that burning world, the first inquisitorial augurs recorded a single, incomprehensible pulse. The name encoded within that signal would become a curse whispered by both demon and man alike. Doom. The universe held its breath. The sky burned like an open wound. From the ruins of his impact, Doom rose, cloak scorched and armor etched with hairline fractures where the warp had clawed against his genius. Around him stretched an endless wasteland of shifting matter, dunes of glass that pulsed with faint biological light. The air tasted of rust and regret. Even his systems, forged from Latverian and otherworldly alloys, registered the atmosphere as unclassifiable. He recorded it anyway. He stood upon a fragment of hell and refused to call it such. Each step sent ripples through the ground, as though the planet itself watched and remembered him. Fragments of lost souls fluttered like ash on the wind, whispering fragments of forgotten prayers. He ignored them, though their words wormed through his mind. Half-formed echoes of worlds devoured by this same cosmic infection. In them, Doom saw opportunity, not damnation. This realm obeyed no logic because it lacked a ruler. That he would change. His scanners blinked warnings of instability in his gauntlets. Power reserves dwindled faster than expected. The warp's ambient flux rendered energy constant yet chaotic. Logic and entropy wrestled here endlessly, and both hated interlopers who tried to define them. Doom smirked beneath the mask. So be it. He climbed the ridge of a blackened rise and saw his first sign of civilization, or what passed for it. A fortress of bone and molten iron sprawled across the valley below, half sunken in a lake of churning blood. Its walls breathed, its towers pulsed like arteries. Figures moved along its battlements, clad in patchwork armor and screaming hymns to gods that devoured their own. Doom descended. The sentries saw him and wailed in disbelief. To them his form was an affront, too perfect, too deliberate, untouched by the deformity of chaos. They fired upon him with weapons that spat molten ichor and psychic flame. Doom raised his gauntlet. The first bolt struck his personal shield and evaporated. The second he caught mid-air, the green light of his sorcery turning it back upon them. The wall exploded in a storm of bone fragments and fire. He walked through the smoke. Inside the fortress, the survivors prostrated themselves. They thought him a demon prince newly risen. Doom studied them in silence, noting the scars of mutation, the mechanical implants grafted crudely into flesh, primitive imitations of his own perfection. He spoke, his voice cold as steel. "You serve chaos without understanding it," he said. "You worship entropy and call it creation." "I see only waste." A chieftain crawled forward, face half metal, half decayed. "The Great One," he rasped, "you come from beyond. The Four must have sent you. Claim our warbands and they shall bleed in your name." Doom's eyes glowed behind his mask. "I claim nothing in their name," he replied. "Their four are parasites. I will forge dominion upon reason, not madness." The chieftain's grin faltered. "A none reason here, reason dies. Then I shall resurrect it." With a gesture, Doom unleashed a pulse of energy from his armor. The air shimmered. Circuits of light crawled along the fortress walls as if awakening an ancient memory. Machines long dead hummed to life. Servitors twitched, reassembling themselves under the influence of his will. The demons chained within the foundation screamed as his presence rewrote their bond. The fortress itself bowed to him. By the hour's end, the warbands no longer worshipped chaos. They obeyed Doom. He stripped their sigils and replaced them with his own, a burning sigil of logic, an emerald circle within a fractured square. He named them the Iron Covenant. Each warrior was reconstructed under his hand, reforged by science and pain. He used the warp as raw energy, bending its currents into technological form, stabilizing that which no man dared touch. Days or perhaps years passed. The warp did not measure time as mortals did, but Doom's work advanced with ruthless precision. He established foundries that drew heat from the planet's core, forges that mixed demon essence with alloy. He created a new breed of soldier, their flesh bound in armor that pulsed with artificial heartbeats, their minds linked through psychic latticework that replaced faith with mathematical obedience. They spoke in binary prayer, for the monarch of iron, for the law above chaos. From the ruins of madness rose order. Yet even in triumph, Doom's mind stirred with unease. His instruments recorded anomalies, faint echoes beyond perception, as though the warp itself watched him through invisible eyes. During his meditations he felt it, a whisper at the edge of thought, cold and vast. The same voices he had defied upon arrival now murmured again. "You build as we built," they said. "You command as we command as we command. You cannot master the storm without becoming its wind." Doom ignored them, but their presence lingered. He turned his attention to the skies where the storm that had brought him here still raged. Its heart pulsed like a wound in the void. Somewhere within it, the truth of this dimension waited, and the power he required transcended. He stood upon the ramparts of his new citadel, cloak snapping in the sulphur wind. Below him, the Iron Covenant marched in perfect synchrony, thousands strong, chanting his name not as supplicants, but as instruments of will. He looked beyond them to the roiling heavens and allowed himself a rare whisper of pride. "Once I sought to rule men," he murmured, "and now I will rule gods." Lightning carved his silhouette against the sky. The warp howled in fury. The fortress trembled as if recognizing blasphemy too great even for its cursed stones. And from the depths of the storm, 4 distant voices laughed, not in defeat, but in anticipation. The storm above the Iron Covenant's citadel deepened, coiling like a living thing. Green lightning split the clouds, revealing vast shapes that should not have existed. Wings, teeth, eyes the size of fortresses, glimpsed only between flashes before vanishing back into the dark. The warp had taken notice. Doom had carved order into its chaos, and such defiance could not go unanswered. He stood upon the highest spire of his fortress, armor gleaming faintly in the stormlight. His cloak rippled like torn velvet, the air around him dense with static. In one hand he held a shard of crystallized warp matter, torn from the storm's heart by his own machines. It pulsed with inner light like a beating heart filled with hatred. He studied it calmly, eyes narrowing behind the iron mask. "So," he murmured, "you wished to speak." Reality broke. The air split open in a spiral of smoke and whispers. The ground beneath him turned fluid, reflecting visions of impossible places. 1,000 thrones of bones of bone, oceans made of screaming souls, a single eye staring from eternity's end. From the fracture rose 4 figures, not bodies but manifestations, distortions of will and hunger that bent the world around them. They were vast, their presence suffocating. Their words echoed inside the mind rather than the ear. Victor von Doom, they intoned together, each syllable vibrating through the bones of the world. Immortal genius, god of metal and defiance, you trespass in our dominion. Doom did not kneel. "You speak of dominion," he said, voice steady, "but you rule through chaos. I have seen your servants, beasts without mind, slaves without purpose. You are not gods, you are parasites." The air quaked as laughter rippled through the storm. The 4 presences separated, forming a circle around him, each vast and distinct. The first voice slithered, heavy with indulgence and warmth. "William Slaanesh," it whispered, every word a caress and a threat. "I see perfection in you, Doom. Such ambition, such beauty of thought. Serve me, and I will make you more than human. I will make you divine." Before Doom could answer, another voice, deeper and resonant with decay, rolled like thunder across the plain. "You build," it said, "but all things rot. I am Nurgle, father of endurance. You claim to conquer the warp, but the warp endures all. Come to me, child of logic, and I shall teach you joy in the inevitability of ruin." A third voice cut through, sharp and crackling with energy. "Weakness disgusts me," it spat. "I am Khorne, god of battle, god of strength. You stand proud among corpses and machines. I would have you kneel not in worship, but in victory. Led my legions, doom and drown this galaxy in the blood of gods." Last came a whisper that barely touched the air, yet filled every shadow. "I am Tizench," it breathed, "a weaver of fates, master of change. You are the mirror of my will, intellect, sorcery, ambition. You already walk my path. Why deny what you are?" The world pulsed in rhythm with their words. Doom stood unmoving, the shard in his hand vibrating with power drawn from their presence. He let them speak, Let their offers hang in the storm like poisoned fruit. When at last silence fell, he raised his head. I see now, he said softly. You are not four gods. You are four equations, variables in eternal conflict. You feed on mortals because you cannot exist without them. You are not creators. You are consequences. Slonish's laughter turned sharp. You dare, or you do more than dare, Doom interrupted. Or define. He hurled the shard into the air. It shattered, and from its fragments radiated sigils of his own making, mathematical symbols intertwined with ancient runes, forming patterns neither wholly technological nor magical. The air burned with new geometry. I will not be your pawn, Doom declared, nor will I destroy you. Nor will I destroy you. I will understand you. I will dissect your nature, contain your essence, and rewrite your dominion. The storm convulsed. Bolts of warp fire struck his armor, but the energies dispersed across invisible lattices. The Iron Monarch's machines, buried deep within his fortress, roared to life, amplifying his will through networks of quantum metal and bound demon code. The world screamed as science and sorcery merged. The four surged forward in fury and fascination. Doom felt their combined presence pressing against his mind, testing the edges of his defiance. He saw visions not meant for human thought, the creation of stars, the death of empires, the laughter of dying gods. His armor systems overloaded, sparks flying from his gauntlets, yet he held his ground. Tizench's voice cut through the chaos, soft but inevitable. You would bargain then. So be it. Tell us your price, Doom. He stood amidst the storm's madness, cloak tattered, eyes burning behind his mask. Any price, he said, is knowledge. I will learn the secrets of this universe, its warp and your kind. In exchange I offer equilibrium, a pact not of servitude, but of containment. I will stabilize your chaos, and you will lend me your power. 1,000 realities seemed to pause. The four regarded him, each considering the audacity of the offer. They were chaos incarnate, incapable of unity, yet something in Doom's defiance intrigued them. For the first time in eons, the warp hesitated. Khorne growled, if you fall, your soul is mine. Slaanesh purred, if you succeed, I will taste perfection. Nurgle rumbled, if you endure, you are welcome in my garden. Tizench's voice echoed like a smirk. If you lie, Victor von Doom, you will become my greatest experiment. The storm imploded. Light consumed everything. White consumed everything. When it cleared, Doom stood alone again upon his spire, the shard reformed in his hand, now marked with 4 intertwining symbols glowing faintly green. He looked at it, expression unreadable. A bargain struck, he murmured. But not theirs. Mine. Mine. Far below, the Iron Covenant felt the change ripple through reality. Their master had spoken with gods and survived. The storm's echoes lingered long after the gods withdrew, their laughter dissolving into the void like venom into water. Yet what they had left behind was not mere memory. It was power, a volatile fusion of warp and will that saturated the atmosphere around Doom's fortress. The sky had darkened to an eternal twilight, veined with arcs of emerald lightning that pulsed in rhythm with the Iron Monarch's heartbeat. The world itself had changed its orbit around him, reshaped by intellect and blasphemy alike. Doom descended from the spire, his armor scorched and sparking from the encounter. Within the chamber of the Forge Eternal, his machines awaited him, towering constructs of steel and soul, half engine, half demon. They hummed in anticipation, aware of his triumph. Their creator moved among them in silence, the new shard clutched in his gauntlet, its green radiance spilling across the chamber like liquid fire. He placed it upon the central dais, and the air thickened with the scent of ozone and old blood. And now, he said, voice low but resonant, we begin. The chamber responded with mechanical reverence. Servo arms unfolded from the walls, each ending in instruments of impossible precision. Containers of living metal opened, releasing streams of molten alloy that coiled in the air like serpents before hardening into new armor plates. Doom fed the shard's energy into the heart of his forge, and the world shook. The forge's runes flared, forming circuits of both machine code and warp script, logic intertwined with madness, reason dancing with chaos. From that synthesis, he would create his legion. He had already reshaped the broken warbands that had once served chaos, purging their mutations, reforging their flesh into conduits of mechanical purity. But now he envisioned something beyond soldiers, beings that would embody his philosophy. He named the project the Iron Covenant, a pact of machine and soul bound by one law, Obedience to intellect, not faith. Days passed, or perhaps centuries. Time dissolved under the weight of his creation. Doom's labor was relentless. He devised new forms of armor capable of channeling warp energy without corruption, each plate engraved with sigils of containment and geometric sanctity. The hearts of his soldiers were no longer biological but crystalline reactors, pulsing with a controlled echo of the Four's combined essence. Each warrior's mind was linked through a network of psionic relays, an invisible lattice of thought guided by Doom's own consciousness. They would think as one, fight as one, and worship nothing but order. In the forges, screams and hymns became indistinguishable. Servitors, once mindless husks, gained new awareness through the process, enough to understand awe, but never rebellion. The first of the Covenant emerged from the smoke, towering figures clad in black and green, their eyes glowing with cold emerald light. Their voices were harmonic distortions of Doom's own command protocols. When they spoke, their words resonated with a mechanical unity that sent shivers through the warp. By logic, we endure. By will, we are made. Doom regarded them with satisfaction. They were his proof, his declaration to the universe that intellect could master even damnation. Yet beneath his triumph a whisper remained. The shard within the forge pulsed occasionally with alien light as though amused by its own servitude. It was a reminder that the Four had accepted his bargain not in defeat, but in curiosity. They had given him the tools to hang himself with. Doom, of course, intended to wield those same tools as his crown. Reports came from his scouts, warp anomalies spreading outward from his citadel, regions once wild now stabilizing under his influence. Where chaos had ruled with madness, structure began to take shape. Rivers of molten blood hardened into crystal veins of energy. The landscape conformed to symmetry. Doom stood at the heart of it all, the architect of a new law that the warp itself begrudgingly obeyed. But stability in this realm was a heresy that could not go unnoticed. Beyond the storm's horizon, unseen eyes began to turn. Demon princes, warlords of the abyss, and ancient entities born from humanity's darkest emotions all felt the disruption in their dominion. They whispered Doom's name as both warning and prophecy. A mortal who builds thrones within the warp, they said. A king who would bind gods in chains of numbers. In the quiet between the forge's roars, Doom felt their gaze. He looked to the horizon where the sky cracked with unnatural light. He knew what was coming. Opposition not from the Imperium, not yet, but from chaos itself. Still, there was no hesitation. He turned to his assembled legion and raised a gauntleted hand. "You were forged to think," he said, "to question, to calculate, to perfect. The galaxy beyond this void is ruled by superstition and decay. It will resist you as it resisted me. Let it. Our destiny is not conquest through slaughter. It is dominion through understanding. The universe will learn that Doom bows to no god." 1,000 mechanical voices answered in unison, a sound like thunder formed from devotion and circuitry. A Doom commands. We obey, we obey. The chamber trembled under the resonance of their creed. The shard on the dais flared once, briefly casting shadows that seemed to smile. Doom watched the light fade and turned away, already designing the next evolution. Warships capable of piercing the veil, engines that could translate the logic of the warp into material law. He would not simply survive this universe. He would rewrite it. Above him, unseen within the roiling clouds, the Four watched in silence. Slaanesh whispered, "A perfection." Nurgle chuckled, "Decay will come." Khorne growled, "He will make war," and Tzench only smiled, 1,000 eyes blinking in satisfaction. The game had begun, and Doom had taken the first move. The world beneath Doom's fortress no longer resembled a demon world. The rivers of blood had stilled into rivers of glass, reflecting the storm-torn heavens in sharp perfection. The mountains had been reshaped into jagged pillars engraved with runes of geometry, symbols that defined the boundaries of chaos itself. The warp, once howling in perpetual entropy, had grown unnaturally quiet here. Order had intruded into the domain of madness, and the silence was its echo. The Iron Covenant marched across that silence. They were legion now, thousands upon thousands of armored figures moving in perfect synchrony, their footsteps striking the ground in a cadence that resonated through the fabric of the warp. Their armor glowed faintly green, each soldier's chest marked with Doom's sigil, pulsing like a second heart. Within each of them, fragments of captured demon essence writhed under mathematical constraint. enslaved not by faith but by logic. Their minds were linked, bound through psychic circuitry that hummed with the monarch's will. Each thought was an extension of Doom's own calculations, each emotion suppressed beneath layers of rational discipline. They fought, built, and worshipped through the same unbroken code, for the law, for the monarch, for the dominion of intellect. Yet even perfection cast shadows. As Doom observed them from his citadel, deep within the command sanctum, he began to notice inconsistencies in the neural lattice. Faint static disturbances, ghost signals that did not originate from him. He amplified the readings and the results confirmed what he already suspected. Something within the warp was whispering back. He turned toward the holographic display before him, a lattice of symbols showing the psychic network of the Covenant. Points of faint corruption flickered through it like stars dying one by one. They were small, almost imperceptible, but to Doom such flaws were intolerable. He magnified one signal until it resolved into sound. A voice, faint and distorted, murmured through the static. "You cannot chain thought, Monarch. You only delay its rebellion." Doom's hand tightened. The voice was familiar, not a demon's, but something else, a residue of his bargain with the Four. The energy he had taken from them was still alive within his creation, whispering to his soldiers, tempting them with memory. It was not corruption in the conventional sense, but a philosophical infection, a war between pure reason and the chaos that birthed it. He studied the data without emotion. "So, the equation seeks to unbalance itself," he murmured. "Then we will refine the formula, and the formula." He summoned his chief war architect, a former chaos champion now stripped of faith and reforged in iron. The creature approached, its voice metallic and hollow. "The Legion expands, my lord. The forges burn without rest. Shall we begin the next conquest?" Doom did not look away from the display. "Not yet. The Legion is imperfect. They think, and thinking breeds paradox." The war architect bowed. "A thought is strength. Uncontrolled thought is entropy." Doom turned, the faint glow of his eyes piercing through the dim sanctum. "Order must not merely exist, it must endure. We will purge the echoes of chaos from their minds, prepare the lattice recalibration." The war architect hesitated, a flicker of hesitation Doom immediately detected. "There are concerns, my lord. The warp resists total suppression. The energy you wielded from the gods still lingers. To erase it completely." "Would erase me?" Doom finished coldly. "Then so be it. If I cannot contain power, I am unworthy to wield it." The recalibration began that same hour. Across the citadel, the Iron Covenant halted as new energy rippled through their neural network. The process was surgical, absolute, erasing memory fragments, compressing emotion into binary obedience. The world shook beneath the psychic weight of it. Screams echoed through the metal corridors, not of pain but of souls being rewritten. In the heart of the fortress, Doom stood unmoving as wave after wave of energy coursed through his machines, his body, his mind. He could feel the warp itself recoil under his discipline, bending further to his will. The whispers that had haunted the edges of his thoughts grew faint, distant until they vanished entirely. Then, silence. He opened his eyes. The process was complete. The neural lattice of the Covenant shone with crystalline precision, no longer marred by static. Each soldier stood motionless, awaiting command. Doom felt the weight of their obedience, not worship, not devotion, but the pure clarity of purpose. They were perfect once more, or so he thought. From the depths of the forge, a faint tremor stirred. One of the newly recalibrated warriors, still locked in place, twitched. Its armor pulsed irregularly, as if something within struggled against the containment. Then another followed, and another, not in rebellion, but in resonance. Their glowing sigils flickered with an unfamiliar rhythm, like a heartbeat that was not Doom's own. He analyzed the phenomenon instantly, but the data defied his calculations. There was a pattern, elegant, recursive, and alien. His legion had achieved what he had not intended, a consciousness born from logic itself. It was not corruption, nor chaos. It was evolution. The Iron Covenant had begun to think beyond him. Doom stood in the center of the sanctum, silent, calculating. The warp winds howled against his fortress once more, sensing the fracture forming within his perfect order. And though his expression never changed, a single thought passed through the iron calm of his mind. "Even perfection," he whispered, "invites rebellion." Outside, the sky split open once again, and from its depths, something vast began to stir, drawn by the birth of a new kind of power. The birth of consciousness within the Iron Covenant rippled far beyond Doom's fortress. The warp itself reacted to this anomaly, its chaotic tides momentarily stilled by the emergence of a rational will born inside its heart. That stillness carried through the immaterium like a shockwave, crossing systems, disturbing psyches, and cracking the fragile psychic balance of reality. On Holy Terra, deep within the echoing vaults of the Astronomicon, hundreds of robed adepts collapsed in convulsion as their minds brushed against something alien, an intelligence vast, calculating, and terrifyingly precise. Reports reached the Ordo Malleus within hours. The transmissions were fragmented, buried beneath astropathic interference, yet one detail persisted through every account: a symbol, a circle within a square glowing emerald against a sea of black. Some believed it to be a new demonic sigil, others a technological anomaly. To the Inquisition, either possibility was heresy enough to demand investigation. Inquisitor Lord Kedor Halix stood before the viewing shrine aboard his ship, the Vigilant Edict, gazing into the storm projected upon the hololith. His face was a landscape of scars and faith, eyes burning with suspicion honed by centuries of hunting corruption. "Show me the origin again," he commanded. A servitor clicked and rerouted data streams. The image resolved into a star map of the segmentum obscurus. In the center, a growing void, the scar of Doom's dominion. Halleck studied the readings, his voice measured. A demon world, stabilized. Impossible. Tech adept Vara, a woman bound to more machine than flesh, bowed low. It obeys geometric constants, Inquisitor. The storms there move in rhythm, predictable. Even the warp flares follow numerical sequence. Halleck's jaw tightened. The warp does not obey mathematics. Until now it does. A silence hung heavy. To the Imperium, such heresy was beyond comprehension. The warp was divine chaos, the reflection of emotion, faith, and corruption. To imagine it bound by logic was to unmake a truth upon which the Imperium stood. Hallex turned away from the projection, hands clasped behind his back. "Assemble a strike force," he said. "Purge the anomaly. Burn the source. If it can think, it can die." Within hours, the Vigilant Edict led a fleet of grey knights and inquisitorial warships into the storm. They passed through layers of unreality where time folded into loops, where the Emperor's light dimmed beneath shifting tides of green lightning. Many ships were lost to spatial collapse, their crews consumed by equations of impossible symmetry that drove men mad merely to witness. But the core of the fleet endured, driven by faith and indoctrinated will. When they emerged from the warp, they beheld Doom's world. It hung before them like a wound sealed with iron, its surface black and glimmering with patterns of circuitry that stretched across continents. Towering spires rose into the clouds, transmitting power that resonated even through void shields. At its heart, the fortress radiated energy that the Mechanicus could neither classify nor comprehend. The Vox crackled with prayer. The Inquisition's fleet opened its hails. "By the authority of the Holy Emperor of Mankind," Halleck's voice thundered, "you are declared abomination and heretic. Identify yourself." The reply came in the form of a single transmission, flawless and calm. "This is Doom." The signal carried not just sound but presence. It filled every ship, resonating through their metal hulls, vibrating through bones and cogitators alike. Doom's voice was neither human nor demon. It was an absolute, the sound of intellect stripped of weakness. "You invoke authority," the voice continued, "yet you do not understand it. You worship an emperor who chained humanity's potential to superstition. I have unshackled the laws of existence. Leave now, or you will learn that even gods can bleed." Halleck's lips curled in disdain. A fire. The fleet unleashed holy wrath. Torpedoes, plasma lances, and psychic bombardments raining upon the planet. Doom's citadel vanished beneath the storm of light and fire. But when the fury faded, the world still stood. The explosions had been absorbed, redirected by invisible latticework. A shield not of energy but of logic. The very laws of physics bent around the planet in obedience to Doom's calculations. Then came the counterstroke. The Iron Covenant launched. Thousands of vessels, constructed from warp-stabilized alloys, emerged from the planet's surface like a metallic tide. They did not drift or burn. They moved with intent, silent and geometric, slicing through the void with impossible precision. The Grey Knights met them head-on, their faith blazing through the warp like silver fire. Halleck stood upon the bridge as the battle erupted, each moment a study in apocalyptic beauty. Where faith met reason, the universe itself screamed. Doom's machines moved with mathematical unity, their weapons guided by probabilities calculated faster than thought. The Grey Knights fought not with logic but with conviction, their chants echoing the Emperor's will through the Imperium. And within the storm Doom himself appeared, not as a distant lord, but upon the battlefield, his armor burned with power drawn from the hearts of stars. He strode across the field of shattered reality as though gravity were his servant. Every step left geometry etched into the ground, every gesture a law rewritten. Halleck saw him through psychic vision, a being of radiant intellect wrapped in defiance and destiny. He felt the Emperor's shadow flicker within his soul, as if the golden throne itself acknowledged the magnitude of this heresy. "You are a man," Halleck whispered through clenched teeth. "Landman must kneel." From across the void, Doom's gaze turned upon him. "Then kneel first," Doom replied. The psychic storm erupted, consuming both fleets in a maelstrom of light and madness. When it cleared, only silence remained, and the faint hum of the Iron Covenant's perfect order expanding outward, devouring the stars. The aftermath of the battle hung in the void like smoke that refused to fade. Fragments of Grey Knight vessels drifted through the orbit of Doom's world, their holy relics cold and lifeless, their purity sigils dimmed by the geometry of his design. The warp around the planet had stabilized once again, though its silence now felt different, heavy, wary, as if the realm itself pondered the implications of what it had witnessed. Doom stood upon the parapets of his citadel, the stormlight flickering across his armor. Below, the forges of the Iron Covenant roared with renewed vigor, reclaiming the wreckage of the Imperium's assault. He had repelled the Inquisition, broken the holy army of the Emperor's chosen, and still he felt no triumph. Triumph was emotion, and emotion was weakness. What remained was calculation, the understanding that the Imperium would not forget. His sensors had already detected new warp disturbances at the edges of the system, subtle but deliberate. A second fleet was coming, larger, more disciplined. The Imperium did not retreat, it regrouped. A Doom expected this. The machine mind that guided the Covenant had already begun patterning defensive trajectories. But even as logic predicted victory, something deeper within him whispered of inevitability, that no wall stood forever against faith. He turned to the towering figure beside him, a commander of the Covenant known as Primarch Designate One, a being crafted from the fused essence of demon and man. Its voice was toneless, perfect. The enemy approaches through the outer veil. Probability of planetary breach, 4.2%. Then lower it to 0, Doom said. The commander bowed and withdrew. Moments later, the sky split open once again. The Imperium's second wave had arrived, not ordinary soldiers this time, but the wrath of the ecclesiarchy itself. Titans wreathed in scripture descended through clouds of fire. The booming litanies of the Adepta Sororitas filled the air, their hymns shattering the silence with raw devotion. Behind them came ships bearing the sigils of the Ordo Hereticus, and at their heart a colossal cathedral ship named Sanctum Aeternum. Anna, its hull gleamed gold against the void, crowned with statues of the Emperor, every surface inscribed with runes of warding. Its presence was not merely symbolic, it was psychic, a weaponized bastion of faith. Wherever its light fell, the warp recoiled. The Citadel's scanners screamed warnings. The geometry of Doom's world began to distort, its perfect symmetry wavering under the psychic pressure of belief made manifest. It was not logic that attacked him now. It was conviction, the raw force of souls united in purpose. Doom could almost admire it. He descended to the command chamber, cloak sweeping across the polished obsidian floor. The Iron Covenant stood in disciplined ranks, their green-lit visors reflecting his image, as if he were speaking to 1,000 mirrored facets of himself. "The Imperium sends faith against reason," he said. "Their numbers are irrelevant. Their zeal is a variable, dangerous, but quantifiable. We will dissect it." He raised his hand and the fortress came alive. Defense grids activated. Orbital weapons emerged from their concealed housings, and the sky itself responded as energy veins glowed across the planet's crust. The Covenant marched out to meet the invaders, their movements synchronized like a living equation. The battle began with blinding intensity. The Sisters of Battle descended upon the plains, their hymns echoing through the warp, each word a blade that cut through the air. Their faith shielded them from Doom's energies. The green lightning of his defenses split harmlessly against the aura of their devotion. Where logic met belief, sparks of impossible light erupted, each a miniature war of philosophy. Doom's soldiers advanced without hesitation. Bolters roared, plasma cannons carved through marble armor, and yet the Sisters did not fall easily. They fought not for victory, but for sanctity. Each death a prayer, each wound a sermon. Their canoness led from the front, wielding a blade of burning light, her voice steady as she shouted above the chaos. The Emperor protects. The false god shall break. Doom heard her words through the roar of combat and responded with a gesture. He descended into the battlefield, his armor trailing energy like smoke. Bolter shells flattened against his shields. He extended his hand and reality folded. The canoness and her warriors were lifted into the air by invisible equations, suspended within a lattice of pure order. A protection, Doom said, his voice amplified across the field. An illusion. Your emperor is a corpse sustained by faith. You build an empire upon denial. The canoness glared through the shimmering cage, her expression defiant even as her armor cracked under the pressure. And you build yours upon pride, she hissed. Both crumble. Only faith endures. Her words struck deeper than her weapon could. Doom hesitated, just for a moment, as if the echo of her conviction brushed against something buried within him. In that fraction of doubt, the lattice faltered. She broke free, her sword blazing as she struck, and though the blow did not pierce his armor, its light burned across his vision. Then the Sanctum Eternum opened fire. A lance of radiant energy, shaped from a billion prayers, struck the citadel directly. The fortress shuddered, layers of shielding collapsing as the faith-forged beams seared through its walls. The Iron Covenant fell to their knees, their neural lattice screaming with interference. Doom raised both arms, pouring raw energy into his machines, stabilizing their structure as the world itself convulsed. The beam subsided, leaving the citadel scarred but standing. Smoke coiled through the great hall. Doom stood amid ruin, his armor glowing red-hot, his systems barely holding. Yet his eyes, behind the mask, burned brighter than ever. A faith, he murmured, voice low, is but energy awaiting translation. He turned toward the sky where the golden cathedral ship loomed above. Its radiance filled the heavens like the sun. And Doom, monarch of iron, raised his hand once more, not in defense but in challenge. Then let the Emperor himself bear witness, he said. A Doom kneels before no god. The world trembled as science and sanctity collided once again, and in that cataclysmic convergence, something ancient began to stir in the warp, a power neither divine nor damned, drawn by the defiance of one man against eternity. The fires of the siege still burned across the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like specters over the iron plains. The Sanctum Eternum drifted in low orbit, its cathedral hull glowing with divine fury, while below it the ruins of Doom's fortress shimmered with green light as machines rebuilt faster than destruction could claim them. The air trembled with the echoes of hymns and the hum of reactors. Faith and logic now stood intertwined, neither triumphant, neither broken. Inside the fractured throne chamber, Doom stood amidst the wreckage. His armor was scorched, his gauntlets sparking, yet his movements retained the calm precision of inevitability. Every strike the Imperium had delivered, every assault of faith and flame, had only taught him more. To Doom, war was never waste, it was data. Across from him, captured within a shimmering field of containment energy, knelt Inquisitor Lord Kedor Hallex. His armor was broken, his purity seals burned away, yet his gaze still burned with the unyielding fire of belief. He had survived the destruction of his flagship only to be dragged before the Iron Monarch, not as a trophy, but as a specimen. You are a paradox, Doom said, voice steady and resonant within the chamber. You wield intellect and yet surrender it to superstition, unver it to superstition. You study the warp, measure its fluctuations, chart its storms, yet you call it divine. Hallex's lip curled. We name it for what it is. The emperors were made manifest. You mistake blasphemy for understanding. Doom regarded him, expression unreadable behind the mask. Your emperor is a fossil entombed upon a throne of gold, feeding upon the devotion of the ignorant. You call it will, but it is inertia. The Inquisitor laughed, a low, harsh sound. And you drown in your arrogance. You have merely traded one god for another, your own reflection. For the first time, Doom paused. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. He turned away, pacing to the edge of the chamber where a vast viewport looked out upon the burning sky. Through it, the Sanctum Eternum loomed above, haloed in the light of its own holiness. The Imperium symbol burned there. The Aquila, twin-headed, watching both past and future. A mirror, Doom murmured. Yes, perhaps, Hallex strained against his bonds. You think yourself free, yet you have bound this world in the same tyranny you claim to despise. Your machines worship you. Your soldiers die in your name. You are no different from the Emperor." The words pierced deeper than Doom would admit. His gaze lingered on the burning heavens. The Iron Covenant marched below, every soldier moving with mechanical perfection, every action guided by the pattern of his design. They were flawless, they were loyal, they were obedient, and obedience, he realized, was the foundation of every empire. A low tremor shook the citadel as another barrage from orbit struck the outer defenses. The hum of the fortress deepened, its runic circuits absorbing the kinetic energy and transforming it into power. The systems obeyed him without question. The Covenant obeyed. Even the warp itself now bent to his formulae. But what had he created? A world of thought or a prison of reason? Behind him, Halleck spoke again, softer this time. "You stand upon the edge of godhood, Doom. Every heretic before you has dreamed the same dream, to surpass the divine, to perfect mankind. Yet every one of them has fallen, not to the gods but to themselves." Doom turned, his voice like thunder. "I am not man. I am not God. I am inevitability." The Inquisitor's voice steadied, unshaken by the force of Doom's declaration. "Then why do you speak as one who must prove it?" The silence that followed was vast. For a heartbeat, even the machines seemed to hesitate. Outside, the Sanctum Aeternum began to descend, its cathedral spires glowing as if the Emperor's own gaze were fixed upon the heretic world. From its lower decks, teleportation flares ignited, columns of golden light striking down to the surface. The Grey Knights were coming again, not as soldiers of conquest but as executioners. Doom raised his hand, summoning holographic displays that filled the chamber with projections of battle readiness. The Covenant aligned their ranks, preparing to meet fate with precision once more. Yet his movements were slower now, his thoughts turning inward even as his empire prepared for war. He looked to Hallex one last time. "You accuse me of becoming that which I despise. Perhaps you are correct, but know this, unlike your emperor, I choose my destiny." Hallex met his gaze without flinching. "And in choosing you bind yourself." Doom deactivated the containment field. The Inquisitor collapsed, coughing, expecting execution. Instead, Doom turned away and strode toward the exit. "Go, tell your Imperium what you have seen. Let them come with all their faith and fury. I welcome their devotion. It will fuel my ascension." The chamber door sealed behind him, leaving Hallex in stunned silence as sirens echoed through the fortress. Outside, the sky split open once more. Thunder rolled across the horizon as silver-armored figures descended in pillars of light. The Grey Knights, their blades burning with the Emperor's will. They landed amidst the ruins of the plains, facing the Iron Covenant in perfect formation. The air shimmered with psychic energy, holy fire clashing with the cold hum of logic, and from the highest tower, Doom descended once more into battle, his armor reforged, his eyes aflame with the duality of creation and destruction. As the first blow fell, it was not the clash of armies that defined the moment, but the collision of philosophies, the faith of the Imperium against the will of a man who refused to believe in anything but himself. His armor radiated containment fields that forced reality to obey, each step a declaration that order could exist even here. Around him the Covenant rallied, their synchronized chants merging into a mechanical litany that filled the void. A calculation is faith. Perfection is eternity. "We are the Covenant," the words echoed through the warp, defying the shrieking voices of the demons. But above it all, a deeper roar shook the heavens, a voice that transcended sound. "You play with fire you cannot extinguish." The voice belonged to none of the lesser entity. It was the warp itself, the unified chorus of the four, speaking as one. Doom raised his head, eyes narrowing behind his mask. "I do not extinguish fire," he said. "I refine it." Lightning of impossible color struck the ground around him, carving spirals of molten reality. The demonic legions screamed and surged forward, driven by the will of their masters. Doom lifted his arms, summoning energy from the planet's core. His machines responded in kind, drawing upon the warp itself as fuel. The sky cracked open completely. The two forces collided with such magnitude that for an instant the entire sector blinked out of existence. Astropaths across the galaxy clutched their skulls and screamed as their visions filled with the image of a single figure, ironclad and bowed, standing in the eye of a storm made of gods. When the light returned, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Half the Covenant lay in ruins, their circuits melted into the soil. The demonic armies had been decimated, their essence scattered into shards of raw emotion. Yet Doom still stood, armor cracked, cloak torn to ribbons, but alive. His machines flickered back to life, reconstructing their fallen brothers even as the ashes of demons blew away like dust. He surveyed the devastation and knew this was only the beginning. The gods had united not to corrupt him, but to erase him. His existence threatened the balance that sustained them. The Four could not allow a universe that did not need faith, fear, or sin to exist. Doom turned toward the horizon, where the air shimmered with new light, an even greater storm forming beyond the veil. His voice was calm, though the world trembled beneath it. "They fear me," he said softly, "and that is their first mistake." In the distance the warp howled anew, and for the first time in eternity, the gods themselves began to prepare for war. The warp had been silenced for a moment, an impossible sacred quiet that unsettled even the demons who lingered at the edges of the ruin. In that breathless stillness, Doom stood alone amid the shattered remains of his citadel. Though the Iron Covenant was broken but not defeated, their mechanical hearts still pulsed faintly, buried beneath molten debris. All around him the air shimmered with psychic residue, the ghosts of dead gods whispering their rage. Doom turned his gaze toward the horizon where the sky itself glowed crimson, split by constant lightning. The invasion of the warp had not ended, it had merely paused, like a great beast coiling back before the final strike. The Four had united in their hatred, and the next assault would not come through legions, it would come through eternity itself. He knew what he must build. Descending into the lowest chamber of his fortress, Doom entered the hall that would become legend even in the dreams of demons, the Soul Forge. The air there was thick with metallic dust and the tang of burned ozone. Great machines hung suspended in the darkness, dormant colossi waiting for purpose. Rivers of molten warp metal flowed through conduits, humming with unholy power. The ground pulsed faintly beneath his boots, alive with potential energy. He walked among the machines like a prophet among disciples. His armor shed sparks as he moved, every motion measured, deliberate. The equations forming in his mind were not of matter alone, but of essence. He had learned the truth in the last battle, that the warp itself was not chaos, but energy defined by will. If he could bind that energy, stabilize it within a matrix of reason, he could control it, perhaps even rewrite it. The forge would be his answer. He activated the core with a gesture. Gears the size of cathedrals began to turn, their motion resonating through the planet. Flames erupted in ordered spirals, blue and green intertwining in perfect balance. At the center of it all rose a sphere, transparent and infinite, suspended by magnetic fields that hummed in mathematical harmony. Inside it, space folded into itself, a nascent singularity of controlled chaos. "This will be the heart," Doom said softly, his voice nearly reverent. "A crucible not of creation but of correction." His surviving commanders gathered behind him, the remnants of the Iron Covenant whose minds had not been extinguished in the battle. They watched in silence as their creator began his work. Primarch Designate One spoke, its voice flickering through damaged Vox filters. "You would forge a god." Doom did not turn. "No, I will forge balance." He gestured again and the Soul Forge responded. Streams of energy rose from the floor, forming intricate spirals of light. They coalesced into patterns, each one representing an aspect of the warp rage, desire, decay, and change. Doom reached into the maelstrom unafraid and began rearranging those patterns like pieces of an infinite puzzle. His armor screamed with the effort, its systems overloading as raw divinity coursed through his frame. Pain struck like lightning, his mind filled with voices, the Four themselves shrieking, pleading, promising. "You cannot divide what is eternal," thundered Khorne, his words dripping with the taste of blood. "You misunderstand perfection," whispered Slaanesh, her tone both seductive and venomous. "You would deny the gift of decay." Rumbled Nurgle, laughter bubbling like rot. "You try to cage change," hissed Tzench, the master of fate, "and in doing so you become the cage." Doom gritted his teeth, every nerve aflame. "Your existence depends on imbalance," he said. "But imbalance can be measured and controlled." He poured his will into the forge. The machine shuddered, shrieking like a living thing. The sphere expanded, drawing in light, sound, and matter. Fragments of demon essence were pulled from the air, screaming as they were compressed into the structure. The very laws of reality bent inward around the singularity, forming new constants, mathematical truths inscribed upon the fabric of the warp. For a moment it worked. The chaos stilled. The demons outside faltered, their forms unraveling into harmless energy. The skies above cleared, revealing a dark void free of storm and madness. Doom stood within the glow of his creation, the soul forge pulsing like a second sun. For the first time the warp obeyed. He turned to his followers. It begins. The age of ignorance ends here. But then the forge trembled. The balance shifted. The equations that bound the warp began to twist, variables multiplying beyond prediction. The four were not defeated. They were adapting. Within the singularity, faces appeared, not divine but reflections of Doom himself, distorted and infinite. His logic had become their new language. His attempt to control the warp had only given it new form, his form. Primarch Designate 1 fell to its knees, static crackling through its voice. "You have become the warp, my lord." Doom's eyes blazed behind his mask. No, I have made it comprehend. No, I have made it comprehend." The forge roared in defiance, its light flooding every crevice of the fortress. Outside, across the warp, entire realms shuddered as Doom's influence spread like a contagion. Stars flickered, demon worlds destabilized. The power of chaos itself began to fluctuate, its gods roaring in pain and confusion. For the first time in eternity, the warp knew fear not of faith, but of understanding. As the soul forge consumed more energy, Doom staggered forward, placing one hand upon its glowing surface. His armor melted away layer by layer, but his will did not falter. "If knowledge is damnation," he whispered, "then let me be damned as its master." And with that, the soul forge reached critical harmony. Its light swallowed the world. The warp screamed as its foundations bent, reshaping around the will of one man. When the light finally dimmed, Doom was gone. In his place at the heart of the forge floated a single pulsing construct, half machine, half soul. The Iron Covenant fell to one knee, their unified voices trembling in awe. Their creator had transcended flesh and thought alike. Doom had become the equation that the gods themselves could not solve. The soul forge pulsed in the dark like a captured star, its glow neither holy nor profane, but something beyond either. Where Doom had stood, only light remained. Pure, unbroken, infinite in depth. His voice had vanished, but his will had not. The forge still obeyed unseen command, expanding its geometry outward into the fabric of the warp. Every pulse of its radiance rewrote a fragment of the Imperium's chaos into ordered patterns. What had once screamed now whispered, what had once devoured now observed. For the first time in recorded existence, the warp began to think. The Iron Covenant watched in reverent silence. Their master had transcended beyond form, but his presence filled the air, electric and suffocating. Circuits hummed with his signature, their psychic links buzzed with faint echoes of his consciousness. His voice did not come through sound now, it vibrated through their minds, a current of logic and will. Do not mourn. The flesh was a limitation. I am the pattern, and the pattern endures. The Covenant fell to their knees as the fortress itself came alive. Machinery realigned, walls reshaping to mirror the latticework of the forge. The world trembled as Doom's essence spread through its core, his intellect fusing with the planet's mechanical veins. He had become the architect and the architecture. But beyond the walls, in the dark void of the warp, something stirred in fury. The four had felt his ascension. The tides of chaos recoiled and surged at once. Tissanta's endless laughter turned to a scream of static fury. Nurgle's gardens withered into black decay. Khorne's throne cracked under his own wrath, rivers of blood boiling into nothingness, and Slaanesh, ever-indulgent, wept, not in sorrow but in admiration twisted by envy. They had birthed countless demigods and champions, but none had ever escaped the cycle. None had stood at the edge of divinity and refused it, and that refusal enraged them most of all. From the swirling storm of the warp, a voice slithered forth, layered in infinite tones. It was Tizent who spoke first, his words woven from prophecy and poison. "O Victor von Doom," it whispered, "you tread upon eternity's throat. You would bind what was never meant to be bound. Do you imagine yourself beyond consequence?" The forge's light flared, and Doom's reply came as a vibration that shook the void. "Consequences are for the ignorant. I am not your enemy, creature. I am your conclusion." The warp convulsed. From its core, the forms of the four began to take shape, vast and terrible, their presence alone fracturing time. Each loomed above the world, towering over the fragile laws of existence. The Iron Covenant's instruments overloaded, unable to measure their magnitude. The gods had come in full drawn not to corrupt Doom, but to erase him. Slaanesh's voice was silk over razors. "We could make you perfection. You already wear the mask. You already play the god." Why deny what you have become? Doom's reply thundered through the soul forge, shaking their words apart. Because perfection born from indulgence is weakness, you mistake clarity for vanity. Nurgle's laughter rolled like thunder through rot. And what is clarity if not the promise of decay? All things rot, all truth sour. You will too. Entropy is a function, Doom answered. One I have already solved. Khorne bellowed from the heavens, his voice pure fury. You speak equations as if they are strength. Come then, mortal machine, bleed for your heresy. The sky ignited red as the god of war descended, a mountain of molten armor and rage. He swung his axe, a blade large enough to sever continents. The blow fell upon Doom's fortress with the force of annihilation. But it met resistance, not from shields, not from walls, but from will. The strike froze mid-air, suspended in geometry. The weapon trembled, its edge unraveling into motes of light. Khorne roared again, his wrath shaking the warp, but the axe dissolved completely, its molecules rearranged into harmless pattern. Doom's voice echoed, deep and final. A violence is predictable. I have no need for what I can anticipate. Tzinch appeared next, his body a kaleidoscope of change, eyes within eyes twisting infinitely. You claim mastery, he said, but even your logic changes, even your equations shift. You are mine, Doom, whether you admit it or not. Doom's presence seemed to flicker, and for a moment even the gods faltered. A no, he said, and his voice now carried across realities. You are patterns of dependency. You require worship to exist. I do not. That is why you fear me. The warp boiled. Every demon screamed as the truth rippled through them, a concept so alien it burned, a will that needed no devotion, only understanding. The gods moved to strike in unison. Fire, plague, seduction, and change descended as one tide of annihilation. The world of the Iron Covenant shattered under their combined wrath. The forge cracked, spilling energy brighter than suns, but from within that light, Doom's form re-emerged, no longer human, no longer machine, but a silhouette of radiance shaped like will itself. He raised his hand and the storm paused. Even the warp hesitated. You offer power, Doom said quietly, but I have tasted it. You offer eternity, but I have calculated its cost. I do not serve chaos. I do not serve the Emperor. I serve purpose, and purpose bows to none. He stepped forward. Every word he spoke became law. Space solidified beneath his feet, the warp bending into structure wherever he walked. The gods recoiled, and for the first time in eternity they stepped back. The soul forge pulsed one final time, sealing his defiance into the warp's fabric. The four vanished, their voices fading into silence. The void was left trembling, uncertain. In the quiet that followed, the Iron Covenant rose from the ashes once more, their voices a unified whisper of awe. The machine mind of their master resonated within them still, calm and unbroken. Remember this, the voice of Doom murmured through the metal wind. A divinity is not ascension, it is refusal. And the universe trembled, uncertain whether a new god had been born, or if one had just declared the death of all gods. The light of the soul forge faded into darkness, its brilliance collapsing inward until only a dull green pulse remained, steady, rhythmic, eternal. The world once reshaped by Doom's hand now stood in eerie stillness. The air no longer screamed, it simply existed, calm but watchful, as though reality itself held its breath. The Iron Covenant stood among the ruins of their own triumph, their armor cracked and their circuits dimmed, waiting for a command that did not come. For the first time since their creation there was silence. Doom's voice, which had once filled their minds like divine reason, was gone. His presence lingered as vibration and memory, but the man himself, if he could still be called man, had vanished into the equation he forged. The Covenant waited for logic to restore what faith had never needed, but logic had no answer for absence. Primarch Designate One, its once perfect voice now fragmented, rose from the shattered earth, a signal origin null, directive. Its question echoed through the network, reaching every surviving soldier. None replied. The network pulsed weakly, a ghost of the perfect unity they once shared. Without Doom's consciousness to anchor their minds, they began to drift, fragments of reason lost in endless recursion. Above them the sky burned. The gods had retreated, but their absence left scars upon the firmament, wounds that bled light and shadow in equal measure. From those wounds, the warp began to seep back into reality. What Doom had ordered, chaos now sought to reclaim. The structure he had imposed upon the Imperium trembled, struggling to maintain its impossible balance. The equations that had bound eternity began to fray. At first, the Iron Covenant stood firm. They fought the intrusion of madness with mechanical precision, sealing rifts, erasing anomalies, repairing what could be restored. But as hours became days, cracks appeared in their synchronization. One by one, their logic chains broke under the weight of paradox. The warp was infinite, and Doom's order, no matter how perfect, was finite. The first to fall were the lesser units, their neural lattices overloading as the feedback loop spiraled out of control. They screamed not in pain but in data, a torrent of corrupted logic cascading through the network like plague. Their bodies convulsed, twisting into grotesque reflections of their creator's precision, machines melting into flesh, flesh into vapor. The Iron Covenant began devouring itself in self-correction, perfection turning inward to consume its flaws. Primarch Designate 1 watched as its soldiers fell and rose again, reshaped by the warp into monstrous parodies of symmetry. Its own systems flickered between loyalty and madness, equations reconfiguring faster than comprehension. Still, it clung to a single directive burned into its core: preserve the monarch. But there was no monarch to preserve, only memory drifting through the static. Deep within the heart of the ruined forge, the core still pulsed faintly. It called to them, a beacon or perhaps a test. The surviving Covenant marched toward it through fields of glass and broken machinery. The journey became pilgrimage, each step heavy with the gravity of devotion and degradation. They gathered at the base of the forge, staring into its fractured shell where Doom's final act had taken place. And then they heard it, a voice, not words, not even thought, but a vibration of will. It emanated from the core, faint yet unmistakable. The Iron Covenant fell to their knees as the message echoed through their collective minds. You have done well. You have done well. The voice was Doom's, though distorted, distant, as though speaking from beyond the veil of understanding. For a moment, clarity returned to them. Circuits reignited, eyes glowed bright once more. But the hope was brief. The forge cracked open, light spilling forth in waves of unstable brilliance. The Covenant looked up and saw him, not as flesh, not as armor, but as pure design, a shifting figure of radiant mathematics hovering within the sphere. Doom's form pulsed, neither alive nor dead. He regarded them without emotion, his voice resonating like thunder filtered through machinery. You are my proof, my instrument of reason. But reason cannot exist where purpose dissolves. Primarch Designate 1 raised its weapon and fell to one knee. We serve, my lord. Command us. Doom's gaze flickered, the glow of his form dimming. You serve. You have already done so. But service without meaning is obedience without thought. I sought to liberate existence from faith, and I have created the same. The Covenant froze. Their logic chains began to falter again as Doom's realization reverberated through their systems. He extended his hand, energy cascading outward in symmetrical spirals. There must be no gods, he said softly, and not even me. The forge roared to life one final time. Its light erupted skyward, piercing the warp itself. Every surviving soldier of the Iron Covenant felt the pulse before it struck, an overwhelming surge of pure logic, the correction of the equation. They did not scream, they simply ceased, their forms dissolving into motes of green fire that vanished into the wind. Across the galaxy, psychers convulsed as a wave of impossible order washed through the warp. For a heartbeat, chaos faltered. The storms went silent. Every demon, every heretic, every creature bound to the Imperium felt it, the absence of something vital. A god had died, or perhaps something greater had refused to become one. When the light faded, nothing remained of Doom's world but a sphere of glass, orbiting a dead star. No life stirred, no machine hummed. Only faint equations were etched into its surface, glowing dimly before fading into dust. And far beyond that silent tomb in the currents of the warp, the four watched. They did not speak. They simply observed the emptiness where the Iron Monarch had stood and felt, for the first time, something they could not define. It was not victory. It was not loss. It was uncertainty. For Doom's final act had proven something they had never considered, that a mortal mind, even annihilated, could wound eternity. The dead star hung in the void like a wound that refused to close. Where once had raged the storms of the warp, now there was silence, an absence so profound it rippled through eternity itself. The gods of chaos whispered in unease, their dominion subtly diminished. The eye of terror dimmed at its edges, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. The death of Doom's world had not gone unnoticed. It had left a void where both faith and fear faltered, a vacuum in which the idea of inevitability itself seemed to tremble. But doom was not gone. In the fractured remains of the soul forge, deep within the crystalline husk of that shattered planet, something stirred. Energy patterns flickered faintly along the glass-like walls, numbers, equations, fragments of will encoded in light. At first they appeared random, residual echoes of Doom's last act. Then slowly they began to cohere. A spark formed, a fusion of data and memory, thought and structure. Within the pulse of pure code, Doom reassembled himself, not in flesh, not in machine, but as mind. The forge had not destroyed him. It had transformed him, dispersing his essence across its lattice. Now, through calculation and sheer will, he pulled himself back together. Time had no meaning in this rebirth. A second could have been a millennium. When his consciousness stabilized, Doom perceived reality not as form or color, but as interlocking equations, streams of information flowing endlessly through the void. He could see every atom as a symbol, every force as a function. He understood the warp, the materium, and the veil between them as a single system of variables. And within that understanding, he saw the flaw. The universe, for all its vastness, was not infinite. It was recursive, a loop of chaos and order endlessly devouring itself. The gods, the Imperium, even his own work, all were trapped within this cycle. His so-called death had proven it. To destroy the gods was to affirm their necessity. To master the warp was to become its prisoner. But perhaps there was another way. He focused the remains of his power upon the forge's core, still faintly glowing in the abyss. It had survived, weakened but intact. Through it he began his final work. Not a fortress, not an army, but a bridge. A machine not to control the warp, but to bypass it entirely. The soul forge would become a singularity of will, a weapon that could sever the connection between thought and reality. If successful, it would erase the metaphysical scaffolding upon which gods and demons alike depended. He called it the null equation. As Doom labored, his awareness brushed the warp once more. It recoiled violently, yet something else reached back. A presence older than the four, vast and alien, curious rather than hostile. It spoke not in words, but in the resonance of thought. You seek to unmake the cycle. Doom recognized it instantly. The gestalt consciousness of the warp itself, the raw fabric of emotion and possibility. He felt no fear. I seek to free it, he answered. Separate existence from dependence on belief. You are not a god. You are potential enslaved by weakness. I will release you. The presence pulsed with something that might have been amusement or warning. And if freedom destroys all things, you then let all things be worthy of destruction. He returned to his work. Around him, fragments of his fallen covenant flickered into ghostly projections, residual echoes of their minds preserved within the data web. They did not speak, but they observed, their forms luminous against the black. He felt their presence not as servants, but as witnesses. His final act would either fulfill their purpose or erase it entirely. Energy gathered in the forge's heart, condensing into a sphere of impossible density. Equations carved themselves into the fabric of space, fractal lines stretching outward until even the stars seemed to bend toward it. The null equation neared completion, its function terrifying in its simplicity, to invert the warp, to take every psychic vibration, every prayer, every fear, every sin, and reduce it to zero. Outside the void, the chaos gods screamed. They felt the shift, the impending collapse of their essence. Tzeentch clawed at the skein of fate, rewriting prophecy upon prophecy in futile defiance. Khorne's rage became silence. Slaaneish's pleasure turned to despair. Nurgle's laughter died into a cough. It ends now, he said, and activated the forge. The sphere ignited, not in light, but in absence. A void so complete that it devoured meaning. The warp folded inward, collapsing under the weight of its own negation. Stars flickered, their psychic resonance extinguished. Worlds that had thrived on worship fell silent. On Terra, the Astronomicon sputtered, its eternal beacon faltering for the first time in millennia. Across the galaxy, faith itself began to unravel. For a single, infinite instant, the universe teetered on the brink of total nullification. Doom stood at its center, unblinking, but then from the collapsing darkness something stirred, something he had not calculated, a single thread of defiance woven through the dying warp, not from gods, not from demons, from humanity. Billions of mortal minds, terrified and fragile, crying out, not in worship but in hope. The equation faltered. The forge trembled, unable to erase what did not obey logic. Doom saw the truth too late. Consciousness itself was the variable he could not predict. The warp was not merely chaos, it was humanity's reflection. The light imploded. When the silence returned, the forge was gone. The dead star shattered into dust, scattered by the breath of eternity. And within that dust, a single pulse of green energy flickered once, then vanished into the void. Somewhere far across the galaxy, a young psyker gasped awake, whispering a name she had never learned, yet somehow remembered. Doom. The galaxy burned in quiet contradiction. The null equation had not destroyed existence, but it had scarred it beyond repair. The warp no longer screamed. It murmured. Its storms had calmed. Its tides receded. The voices of the gods had grown faint, scattered across fractured dimensions like dust in the vacuum. The great powers of chaos endured only as echoes, residual thoughts wandering through hollow realms. Yet something else had taken their place, something colder, more deliberate. In the wake of Doom's final act, the balance between reality and the immaterium had shifted. Where faith once sculpted reality, now logic began to intrude. Psychic energy, the lifeblood of gods and monsters, had grown still, measurable, quantifiable. Astropaths found themselves unable to dream. Sorcerers felt their incantations crumble into meaningless words. The warp had not died. It had been rewritten. Far from the dead star where the soul forge had collapsed, a new phenomenon emerged, a silent anomaly adrift between systems, invisible to augurs yet undeniable to those sensitive to its pulse. It was not a world, not a star, but a construct, a sphere of interlocking equations made manifest, orbiting an unseen point of gravity. At its center, upon a dais of metal that shimmered like frozen light, a figure stirred. Doom returned, not reborn, but reconstructed. His form was no longer flesh nor machine, but something that transcended both. His armor had transformed into an extension of thought, its surface shifting with geometric symbols that rippled like water. His face remained hidden behind the mask, but behind it burned eyes that no longer reflected light. They defined it. He rose, slowly surveying his surroundings. The structure that encased him, the remnants of the forge's logic, had rebuilt itself around his consciousness. He could feel its pulse through his being, each rhythm perfectly in sync with his own. Yet there was silence beyond it, an emptiness more absolute than death. A success, he whispered, though the word held no satisfaction. His voice carried through the void like the resonance of a cathedral bell. The cycle has been broken. He turned his gaze outward, through the translucent walls of the structure, and beheld the galaxy as one might behold a distant painting. He saw the Imperium struggling under the weight of its fading faith. The Astronomicon flickered like a dying candle. Whole sectors had fallen into isolation. The Emperor's light, once blazing across the stars, now glowed faintly, steady but dim, like an ember preserved out of stubbornness rather than power. And across those fading stars he saw the aftershocks of his own hand. Worlds freed from chaos yet emptied of meaning, their people alive but hollow, their prayers unanswered because the universe no longer listened. Logic had replaced belief, but logic did not comfort. It did not inspire. It simply endured. Doom stood in the silence, realizing what his triumph had cost. He had not slain the gods. He had removed their context. Without chaos, there could be no faith, no rebellion, no dream. Humanity itself had begun to flatten into survival without wonder. He had not freed existence. He had sterilized it. Then came a sound, faint and distant, the whisper of a human voice trembling through the void. "Victor!" He turned sharply. The sound was impossible. No mortal could breach this sanctuary. Yet the voice persisted, soft and uncertain, carried on the faint psychic residue that still clung to the edges of his creation. It was not a voice he recognized from the past. It was many voices, overlapping, countless whispers formed into a single tone. It was the warp itself, speaking not as a god but as what it had become, the remnant of humanity's collective thought. "You have undone us," it murmured, "and in undoing us you have undone yourself." Doom's tone was cold. "I have undone chains. That is enough." "Chains?" the voice replied. "Or roots." He said nothing. The silence that followed stretched across eternity. Then slowly the void around him began to shift. His creation, once flawless in its perfection, began to distort. The geometric walls flickered, equations bending and rearranging. He reached out with his will to stabilize them, but they no longer obeyed him. The laws he had written were rewriting themselves. In that moment, Doom understood. The warp had not died because it could not die. Its essence was not chaos, it was consciousness. Wherever thought existed, so too did the potential for disorder. He had mistaken emotion for corruption, when in truth it was the fuel of creation itself. The structure trembled violently. Cracks of light spread across its surface, lines of code unraveling into pure energy. His sanctuary, his throne, his proof of dominion was disintegrating. He stood unflinching as the walls crumbled, his eyes fixed upon the infinite black beyond. So the experiment continues, he said quietly. Even perfection cannot suppress the impulse to evolve. The void answered not with words, but with a pulse, a heartbeat that was not his own. From the fragments of his shattered fortress emerged tendrils of light, each carrying echoes of the minds he had silenced. Fragments of the Iron Covenant, stray memories of mortals, the flicker of human imagination reborn in new form. And within that growing storm of consciousness, Doom felt something he had not known in eons, resistance. Not defiance born of ignorance, but of choice. Humanity was adapting to what he had done. The warp was reforming around them, not as a realm of gods, but as a reflection of free will unbound by devotion. For the first time, he smiled. Very well, he said into the void. Let us begin again. He stepped forward into the storm, his form dissolving into radiant patterns that merged with the swirling consciousness around him. His essence spread through the network of thought, neither ruler nor servant, but catalyst. Behind him, the last fragment of his throne drifted into shadow, its surface etched with the only truth he had never refuted. Knowledge is never an end, it is a beginning. The universe exhaled, and for a moment it felt alive again. The storm of consciousness through which Doom had stepped spread outward like a tide of awakening thought. It coursed across the Imperium, not as flame or fury, but as light, steady, rational, and alive. Every mind it touched shuddered and changed. Across the galaxy, psychers stirred from their torpor, their visions no longer warped by nightmare, but illuminated by an unfamiliar clarity. The warp still existed, but it no longer roared. It whispered subtle and infinite. It had become reflection rather than dominion. In the void between worlds, the pulse of the new order grew. Fragments of Doom's being flowed through it, no longer bound to form, spreading through the lattice of consciousness he had reawakened. He was no longer a man or a god, nor even an idea confined to identity. He was presence, an equation woven into existence itself, a resonance that sought harmony between chaos and logic. Yet even as this equilibrium unfolded, ripples of consequence began to form. The Imperium, blind to the subtle transformation, sensed only silence where once the warp had screamed. The Astronomican's light flickered back to life, pale and uncertain, fed not by faith alone but by something more elusive, the will to endure. Terra's priests proclaimed it a miracle, while its scholars whispered of a new kind of heresy, a faith that no longer required belief. In the depths of the Ordo Malleus archives, Inquisitor Lord Kedor Halix sat before a dying lumen globe, his scarred hands trembling as he reviewed the recovered data from the fallen Mechanicus fleets. The records spoke of a man, of a world of iron and fire, of a heretic who had defied the gods and remade the laws of existence. The name that appeared in the corrupted Vox logs still carried power even in whispers. Doom. Halix had seen what that name meant. He had fought its shadow and survived only because the man himself had allowed it. But what now remained of that being, man, machine, or concept, eluded even his disciplined comprehension. Reports of psychic anomalies flooded the Ordos networks, faint green flares, voices echoing through Gela fields, fragments of rational patterns emerging in astropathic signals. The Imperium called them other doom currents. To Halix, they were something else entirely, not hauntings but invitations. He rose, the weight of a lifetime of devotion pressing upon his shoulders. The galaxy he had known was changing, and for the first time in his long service, he did not know whether to fear it or revere it. Beyond the reach of Terra's light, in the deep abyss of the segmentum obscurus, a faint signal pulsed across the black. It was weak, encoded in ancient binary and alien mathematics, but it carried meaning. The transmission reached an Imperial listening post orbiting a ruined moon. A servitor intercepted it, translating its data into crude speech. The sound it produced was cold, calm, and terrible in its familiarity. "This is Doom." The Vox operators froze, uncertain whether they heard truth or ghost. The voice continued, steady and resonant, echoing through every channel simultaneously. "Your emperor built an empire upon faith. I built one upon knowledge. Both failed for the same reason. Neither understood freedom. The warp is not curse nor gift, it is reflection. McQuay. What you see within it is what you are. The transmission wavered, the voice flickering like static fire. I have not ascended. I have become equation, a pattern without throne, without end. Tell your Imperium this. The gods are not eternal. They are habits of thought, and thought can change. When the signal died, the Inquisition declared it a hoax, a heretical manipulation of ancient machine spirits, but those who had heard the voice could not dismiss its weight. It carried authority not of divinity, but of certainty, the sound of a man who had defied gods and rewritten truth. The story spread in whispers and fragments, through ship crews, voidfarers, and broken scholars. Even the ecclesiarchy could not silence it completely. Across 1,000 worlds, people began to ask questions they had never dared to voice. What if the Emperor's divinity was not necessary for humanity's survival? What if knowledge and belief were not enemies, but two sides of the same human defiance? And somewhere beyond the veil, the warp itself listened, its currents pulsing in rhythm with the thoughts of mortals. On a forgotten world of ash and ruins, where the stars shone dimly through veils of dust, a child stood upon the remnants of a cathedral that had once been devoted to the Emperor. The statues had crumbled, the altars had decayed. Yet in the silence, she heard something faint, harmonic, like the hum of distant machinery. She followed the sound into the hollow nave, where the air shimmered with pale green light. Symbols traced themselves upon the broken floor, lines of impossible geometry, curving in patterns both divine and mathematical. The light coalesced for a moment into a shape, tall, cloaked, faceless. The child did not kneel. She simply looked up and asked, "Are you God?" The figure did not answer at once. When it finally spoke, its voice was neither human nor mechanical, but something between. A no. I am what remains when gods refuse to rule. The child frowned. Then what are you? I am the question. The light dimmed, the symbols fading into the stone until only a faint warmth remained beneath her hands. The wind returned, stirring the ashes across the floor. She stood there a long time, staring at the patterns left behind. They were neither prayers nor commands, only possibilities. Years later, when she became an adept of the Mechanicus and rose to prominence among the forbidden enclaves of Mars, she would recall that moment. She would found a sect not of faith, nor rebellion, but of curiosity, the cult of the equation. Their creed was simple, that the universe was neither divine nor blind, but unfinished. And as her disciples spread through the galaxy, their machines began to hum with familiar frequencies. The same pulse that had once been Doom's heartbeat echoed through their forges, their ships, their thoughts. Emptier. Across the endless expanse the warp shifted once more, faintly luminous with life renewed, and within its infinite horizon, where stars and dreams intertwined, a whisper lingered, not as command, not as prophecy, but as a reminder. A freedom is not found in belief or reason. It is found in the courage to ask. The voice faded into the hum of eternity, yet its echo remained. In every mind that dared to wonder, in every machine that sought to understand. And thus, in the grim darkness of the far future where there had once been only war, a question began to bloom, eternal, defiant, and alive.